Today I want to talk about Telepresent Modular Design. So this is a site we're all very familiar with, the video call, and I'm interested in how we might make work for this space, whether that's a piece of artwork, a performance, or a design system. I'm curious whether we could make something that's realized in real time by all the people in that video call. I think as well there's potential for exploring modular systems, since all the windows are interchangeable and we can swap media within those windows. And I particularly want to encourage cooperation and collaboration between people in that space. And finally, I want to encourage people to actually turn their cameras and mics on, to use themselves as part of the work, or to at least play with the idea of hiding and revealing. So I want to quickly break down the design space. What have we got to play with when we're making a piece of art for Zoom? So here's a simplified version of the Zoom interface. We have a screen. That's the most obvious thing. Everything we see in the Zoom interface is part of one big screen, perhaps including the interface itself, the buttons, but we can think of all the windows of all the people as making one giant collage, one big screen. But we also have the potential to treat them as separate screens, of course, as well. So they are individual pieces of a puzzle that combine to make one big image. And there's a nice tension there between the separate pieces, the smaller components, and the larger image, the larger artwork. We can think about the axes we've got. We've got the dimensions of top to bottom and left and right, so X and Y. And that creates a relationship between the windows. One window is above the other. Other windows can be looked at as side by side, and they're nice concepts to explore. The Zoom interface also has buttons underneath it. They have different functions. They can be brought into play in terms of interactivity. Most importantly, we have a camera and a mic. Those things can turn on and off. They can reveal or hide, and they allow us to put ourselves in the space, or to contribute things through sound. When people turn their cameras off, there is an avatar that can be used. You can put an image in that space. It also is this idea of representing something that's not there. You can even put a GIF animation in your avatar. Of course, the person themselves is perhaps the biggest part of what the artwork could be, especially if that's more of a performative thing. And we should also consider their backdrops, and I mean the space behind them physically, whether that is a green screen or whether that is a lovely bookcase or something else. It's something that now we're considering how we curate or compose that space behind us in real life. Or alternatively, we can actually put a digital background. We can use a digital image to suggest an other space or another thing, and that's very easy to change. And in some cases, that can even be a video. And finally, the last dimension that we should consider is time. Each of these windows has their own sense of time. Obviously, sometimes that breaks down when there's a bit of latency, but this is where it's maybe multi-dimensional. We're all experiencing this as a durational experience. So video calls are an artwork that happens through time and in real time. So let's look at some of these terms to give a better idea of what they mean. So when I talk about modular, I'm thinking about things in terms of grids and frameworks, very much as systems. And in those grids and frameworks, you might have components, the bits, the pieces of the puzzle. And finally, very importantly, these components are reconfigurable. They can be put in, added, they can be subtracted, they can be changed position. They might themselves be able to be altered. But the idea is that within that system, these things can change and yet somehow always be sort of cohesive. So the classic example of this is Lego. All these pieces are slightly different, but not vastly different, but they can be put together in lots of different ways, depending on the shape, size, and color, to create sort of infinite outcomes. This is a meme using the Pope, and the idea is that it uses the way Twitter displays 4 images when people add 4 images, and people change the top left image. In a sense, they're replacing part of the original image. So we have this idea of, again, 4 separate images creating one giant image, but there's a playfulness around how we substitute that top image. I also like the fact that this one is a fortune teller, which is itself a kind of modular system. This is a good example for me of using this idea of 2 things going together to create unexpected combinations. This is a kind of modular system in that it's just about putting images up either side of that line. So this is a nice piece of design branding for Abandoned Normal Devices Festival. But it's thinking about it's about presenting that tension between things being similar but also different, things going together but also clashing from different worlds. This is perhaps a really important early idea of modular systems. These are Miriorama cards. These are cards which were illustrated to create an infinite landscape, and the idea is that you can place these in any order and you'll always get this beautiful landscape, and that again is clearly sort of reconfigurable, but as long as you stick to this basic rule of the horizon being in roughly the same area, then you can keep adding to this system and playing with it. This is something I've been exploring myself a little bit. I've been making a card game, working with basic Fair knitting patterns, and exploring how different motifs can be placed together to create symmetries, repetitions, or slight clashes. But again, it's just a modular system. It's stuff that each card stands on its own, but together they can form bigger patterns. This is something I've been doing recently with screens. How can I make screen installations where each screen is separate, displaying a kind of separate character or letter of the alphabet, but together they can form words to create poetry. This is the Plastisarm Mosaic, a series of 35 screens arranged in this crazy paving, and it allows artists to make work which plays with that tension of one single image but also lots of separate component images that juxtapose each other to tell a story. This is another piece of work that was on the Plastisarm screens, and it's about juxtaposing bodies to create this other kind of organism. In this case, it's actually playing with the idea of a train made of people. But we should also remember that the screen itself, the screen you're looking at right now, is a modular system. It's made of many tiny pixels arranged in an array on a grid. Artists have played with this idea of screens as modular systems, playing with resolution and material, such as Daniel Rosen's wooden mirror. And here's another very much hands-on modular system. Again, it's a kind of screen where people are simply turning pixels on and on by opening and closing these small hatches to reveal the color behind. So again, we have the tension between something turning on and off, but also being part of making a bigger image system. And importantly, this is a collaborative work. People just come up to the wall and change it by opening and closing the panels. And this is not a new thing. We We might also recognize this idea of collaborative image making and giant pixels from crowds in football stadiums doing card stunts. So there are lots of examples where we have people working together to to create giant artworks using modular systems. Let's have a look at telepresence then. What do we mean by that? Well, we can think of it as about connecting people. It's connecting people through an interface, and it happens in real time, and it kind of smashes our sense of space and time. We're somehow together, and yet we're apart. And finally, there's this idea of the portal, what that interface is that we are traveling through. So one of the earliest and best examples of this idea of telepresence was Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz's A Hole in Space. These were experiments that linked up two cities on either side of America, simply with, well, I say simply, with a live video link. It was obviously very, very hard at that time to do. But simply the act of linking people up in real time created a space for really interesting interactions. And this is something we absolutely take for granted now. But just imagine how mind-blowing this would have been at that time, especially to just come across this artwork as you're walking through the city. But yeah, that kind of interaction now is very much an everyday experience. I talk to my mum and dad on Skype. They know, we're using these tools as part of our daily lives for work, for keeping in touch. And we, in a way, that's brilliant, but we also stop thinking about them. And these everyday tools, they offer us little opportunities for play and experimentation. Each interface is slightly different, and each version of the tool, again, is slightly different. This is an early version of Skype that allowed you to move your window around and also resize it. So I got into the habit of making these collage Skype faces. That's my brother on the left, and that's Daniel Rourke, an artist, on the right. Now, Daniel himself has done a lot of work exploring these tools. He and Kyun Kimi developed glitch karaoke, which were, about 10 years ago, trying to do collaborative karaoke through the video tools that were available. They were a lot more clunky than they are now, and that created some really fun hiccups, which, at the time was kind of ridiculous. Now it's very normal. This is a project that Reduct did, that included myself and other artists exploring how old people in residential homes might use video technology, how they might explore that creatively, and how it could be used to create new experiences that bring people together. This is us prototyping Skype bingo with my dad calling the numbers. And that was a really fun experience. At the time, it felt like a very silly idea, but now it's obviously it's probably something you've done yourself, playing games over video call. Even Matthew McConaughey did some calling of the numbers early on in the pandemic. And yeah, we even did a Skype seance. We even did some role playing of playing dead famous people like Marilyn Monroe and Abraham Lincoln. Again, and using this idea of the video call as a kind of portal, not just through time and space, but perhaps through another dimension. So I'm going to run through a few quick examples and ideas and sketches about making something for this space. So the quickest route to goal is perhaps to change the background and to make images that fit together as people's backgrounds. That's me demonstrating how, actually, if I was in a call with many other versions of myself and we all had backgrounds that came from a similar set, there might be an opportunity for a kind of fun puzzle activity, but also simply it's a design system. It kind of makes this kind of cohesive experience, this cohesive design across all the video callers. Here's another one using, a few more abstract shapes. But again, I'm interested in how we can play with this tension of things fitting together and clashing as a design system. This one is inspired by the ZX81 character set. You can see there's a lot of room for how these things fit together to create new patterns. This one is exploring how images might fit together to create a cohesive image, in this case a gradient, but also again play with that tension of things clashing. This is inspired by a game called Metro, which is a puzzle game, which I really love. So it's using that interface to make different routes that fit together, like a train system. And this is me playing with my knitting card game, Farrell 40. So yeah, perhaps there might be a way to explore playing a card game collectively in this way. But we might also think about screensavers. What happens? We might even think about what happens in the absence of people. Can we play with this idea of presence and absence? Can we play with the screen being its own thing and just getting on without us? And I'm just going to run through some examples that students did in the workshop that I ran recently at Manchester School of Art. This first one explores communication through sign language. Each student here is spelling out a different letter, and together they create a word. Notice as well, they're also playing with this idea of colour sets, the CMYK colour set. These were all graphic design students. But it's a really nice use of the background as well, but also, of course, of performance and this idea of communicating through the screen collectively. This is a little experiment playing with the idea of perhaps computer games and Pac-Man. Could we have a system where people are actually somehow managing to move Pac-Man between their screens and chasing other people around the screen? This example explores how we might pass an object between the screens. So you're going to see the students actually, they each have the same animation on their phone, and they are creating the illusion that they're passing the phone or this screen between themselves.
Save it, load it, check it, quick rewrite it, plug it, play it, burn it, rip it, drag it, drop it, zip unzip it, lock it, fill it, call it, find it, view it, code it, jump and lock it, surf it, scroll it, pose it, click it, cross it, crack it, switch, update it, name it, read it, tune it, print it, scan it, send it, fax, rename it, touch it, bring it, pay it, watch it, turn it, leave it, start, format it, buy it, use it, break it, fix it, trash it, change it, mail, upgrade it, chart it, point it, zoom it, press it, snap it, work it, quick erase it, write it, cut it, paste it, save it, load it, check it, quick rewrite it, plug it, play it, burn it, rip it, drag it, drop it, zip unzip it, lock it, fill it.
This piece is students replacing themselves with video backgrounds. Some versions of Zoom allow you to do this, or you can use a software such as CamTwist to replace your actual camera. This plays with the idea of screens themselves glitching when they go wrong to create this kind of weird collage. So it becomes a kind of collective VJing. And finally, we can think very simply about just revealing and hiding ourselves using the camera. This was a little experiment we did collectively. I would ask a question and the students would cover their camera with their thumb if they disagreed, or reveal themselves if they agreed. So it's a great way to create interaction between the group, but it also, you can see there's a really nice kind of image making. We've got all these different shades, and treating the image as just color, really, just the kind of modular color system. And this idea was actually stolen from the Chappelle Theatre. who use this technique of placing coloured card in front of their camera to send a message to thank people for supporting them over 30 years. So I'm going to end by playing this.
Amis de la chapelle,
Bonjour.
Le 25 mai de cette année 2020.
Nous fêterons nos 30 ans.
30 ans de création.
30 ans d'aventure.
30 ans ensemble.
Et ensemble, à 30 aujourd'hui,
Nous lançons les festivités.
So I really like that. That's a great example of collective image making, but also playing with this idea of the person and the presence and the revealing and hiding. So let's just go over again how we might think about the design space. We have the parameters of orientation, position. Of course, the windows can be moved around and reordered. You can click and drag them. There's this notion of scale and how these things combine. There's a sense of structure that time gives us, how we might choreograph a performance or work with prepared media or live elements to create a structure or a narrative to an artwork. We have, of course, the backdrops, our real backdrops, the digital backgrounds, and our avatars, which are all really great ways to make images. And finally, of course, we have the bodies. We have ourselves as we are contained in the box of the screen, and maybe we can play with this idea of being in those boundaries, or even passing things, or putting ourselves through those boundaries and interacting. So as we're approaching this idea of making something for the video call space, I want you to think about what can we do together that we can't do alone. What can we do now in this virtual context that we can't actually do in real life? What does real-time experience give us that perhaps fixed media doesn't? And of course, what can we do with many screens that we can't do with one? We've also got to think about this context. But does this actually give us an opportunity to work together in a way that we couldn't before? And finally, well, it's thinking about the actual software itself, whether there are differences between certain interfaces such as Zoom or others like Teams. How can we exploit them? Or if a software itself can't do something, are there ways that we can hack it? Okay, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting to think about making art and design for the video call space, and I look forward to seeing what people produce in the future.